Hey everybody. So I'm having massive problems making this video. I'm on a 16th take right now. It's something so simple. So Dan Hawkins put up a video the other day that was the 6 scales that are going to dictate about 80% of your bass playing. Whether or not that's true, I leave that to the philosophers, and I'll link in the description of the video so you can see for yourself. But I'm very process oriented, and what I'm always looking for is how can I improve what I do and how I do it. So in this case, the what is playing the bass or learning the bass, because even though I'm not a rank beginner, I'm learning all the time. So you're learning, I'm learning. And what I came up with is when we think in terms of fundamentals of like how we learn things, one of the things that you may have had a tool as a learning tool as a kid, as an example, was flashcards. So I took some index cards and I made scale diagrams all based on A. And I did base X amount of these on Dan Hawkins' video. So I'm not going to go through them all so as not to have any spoilers. But good old Locrian. It's, a lot of these scales, if someone was to say to me, play it, I'm like, I couldn't play it if my life depended on it. I never bothered to learn scales. And I know it's just outrageous. Like, how can you possibly play the bass or any instrument and not know the scales? It's because I didn't really have to. If I was learning a song, depending on what instrument I was playing, if it was the guitar, I was probably strumming. So no need for scales there. And then on the bass, I tended to either just play what the tab book or the record said to do, or I would make up my own original bass lines to my own original music, and then therefore no need for scales there either, as I just played what felt good on the bass. I didn't just chug root notes and eighth notes on everything I did. I actually did come up with original bass lines that I'm actually, like, now that I'm serious about playing the bass, I'm kind of impressed with what I did in a vacuum back in the 90s, but now I'm more serious and committed to like learning the stuff, learning the scales, learning how to properly finger pluck instead of, I used to play with my thumb and not thump. I used to play with my thumb like this. And it was just, I'm very pragmatic. And it worked for me. And I see other people do it. Like I'll see their YouTube videos and they vary without irony. They'll play whatever they're doing with just their thumb, but they're not thumping. They're using their thumb to strum or to pluck the notes. And you do you. But people like John Taylor from Duran Duran, I remember back in the 80s with all his music videos, and I would see him play like this, and I thought, ooh, that's like the professional way to play the bass. And kind of is. And I just could never get going with that. I never could get into it. And I couldn't get into picking either. And finally it was like, well, I'm just going to use my thumb. And that worked. And I never again got the thumping action down. So with the scales, when I got serious about the bass, I'm like, okay, time to learn the major and minor scale. So just to kind of prove it up, I drilled this over and over and over. Well, Mixolydian is one of those, like, you'll hear about it, like, oh my God, it must be so daunting. But here's the thing. Remember that A is what I'm sticking with at all times? And your goalposts are going to be A root to A octave. So whatever you do, that's 3 strings worth of playing, potentially, unless you're skipping stuff. And it's about from here to here, between my fingers here. It's about that much real estate that you're covering, again, on 3 strings. And if you shift up 1, then it's 3 strings up 1. So A here, but then D here. But it's the same shape. That's why I'm doing that. That's why my flashcards are so simplified, in that it's just this part of the scale. Yes, the scale goes all over the place up and down the neck, but let's not worry about that at the moment, especially if you're learning a new scale and you're trying to figure it out. Then get the fundamental basic shape with just what I figured out now. So Mixolydian is not mystical, it's just, that's all it is. And you'll see it for yourself, like if you look it up online or one of these ridiculous books like this. But here's the thing. Nobody got time for that. And I just remember back in the day, I was like, I'm gonna get serious with guitar, and I'm gonna learn these scales because I'm gonna play lead guitar, and that never happened. And my brain just shuts down when I see all this jazz down here about like all the possible places the notes can be on the fretboard. It's just my brain melts, and it still kind of does. So I'd rather than discourage myself or get frustrated, it's like let's just deal with bite-sized little chunks and then keep widening the net more. You'll hear, like with pentatonic, that there's different positions, and especially on electric guitar. Because it's kind of important, if you're playing a lead, you're going to need to go end to end with all this lead for all the variety of your notes. Bass, on the other hand, you tend to kind of stick it somewhere and not move. So you'll hear from here down referred to as the cash register, meaning this is where you're going to get paid to be a bass player if you're playing down here all the time. And your mileage may vary. I mean, you will venture out beyond this, but you tend to not be like up here unless for some reason you're soloing on the bass. But it's not to say you never ever play up here. Like as an example, Day After Day by Badfinger, mostly all up here. I was really shocked. I thought it was like down in the low end. Nope. It's like 12, 15, 13. Like, what are you doing? So, not unheard of, literally, for the bass to be played up higher. But it's funny, like sometimes, like with Joy Division, you'll hear like, "Oh my God, he was playing on such a high register." Yeah, here, like up here on this string, but he's down here fretwise, but he's up here on this string. So higher register is relative. Okay, so my advice, should you accept it, is if you're learning scales and there's ones that you're just like you've heard of and you don't know what to do with it, well, then get an index card or a piece of paper or something and draw out some lines and chart out the basic shape just from one note to the root or root to the octave of whatever. So I did A as my example. But it works anywhere. Here I'm on G. Oop. There we go. G Mixolydian. What about, oh, I don't know. How about E? Same shape. There's E. All right, got it. So the other thing to do, if you really want to be extra, is now that you've charted it out, now that you've learned the finger positions of what these different scales are, and I had like a smaller stack of these yesterday, and today I've added more. And I added things like Phrygian and Lydian and stuff because it's the kind of thing I can hear about it, but I don't really kind of know what to do with it. So the way to kind of figure it out is I'll put on the drum machine and play random patterns and then challenge myself to just use notes from whatever scale. Now that does not mean play the scale up and down. You could, but it's not the greatest, unless again you're trying to get like the fingering down, like that could be a thing, certainly. But if you're trying to craft original bass lines around that scale, I don't recommend just going up and down the scale by rote. But pick notes that are just from that. So one thing that kind of was funny to me, bass bass. Locrian. So if you ever hear people say, no one plays Locrian, well, there it is. There's notes from the Locrian scale. Gotcha. So mess around with it. Just again, when you're practicing in your own space like this, or wherever you're at, um, it's your space. Do your thing and experiment, learn, find out. Like a lot of times, things are by accident. Like when I would craft original bass lines, I wasn't well. One, I wasn't like out to uh, set some kind of record or whatever, be like the ultimate bass line writer. I was just like, what fits the song? And I would come up with something like, yeah, you know what? Here's an example. This is pretty simplified, like as in the bass line's not astounding, like it doesn't go all the way up and down the fretboard, but here's an example. Over and over and over. And in the context of that driving four on the floor beat and everything, and it's a total jam song, and it goes for about 10 minutes. Um, Even though that bass line is really repetitive, it drives the song. And if you didn't do it, it's just not going to sound right. And there's other stuff I throw in, but that's the principal bass line. Well, when you look at music around, it's like, yeah, actually, that's pretty serviceable. A lot of people do stuff like that. So anyway, like I said, just pick a scale, mess around with the notes, get used to the fingering. But then the more of these scales you know, I think, then you're going to have more tools in your arsenal. That if you know you're in the key of, say, G, instead of just the usual, like in the usual, in my case, being, minor pentatonic, then start messing around like, well, would Locrian work? Would Dorian work? Would Phrygian work? If you're really big into music theory, you kind of would know, like, oh, you would never play Phrygian there or whatever. Like, well, cool, but for the rest of us idiots, don't know what they're doing. It's a great way to kind of understand, like, because it's not like the bass is going to explode if you play weird intervals. It's just going to sound not right, and you'd be like, oh, I'll know not to do that. So yeah, just have fun with it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Keep playing, keep learning. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.